What would you do if the secret of your pregnancy was revealed in the worst possible way? It was supposed to be a perfect night. I prepared Ethan's favorite dinner, hoping to finally earn his mother's approval after weeks of tension. But when my mother-in-law whispered something into his ear, I saw his face shift from calm to furious in an instant. And then, in a moment of pure shock, he slapped me, his pregnant wife, before he even understood what was happening. The shock, the tears, and the overwhelming nausea hit me all at once. Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever forgive him? More importantly, could I stay with someone who had hurt me and our baby like this? I still recall the sound of my mother-in-law's heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked toward Ethan. The aroma of the lasagna I had spent hours preparing filled the air, and I was hoping, desperately hoping, that tonight I would finally earn her approval. My stomach was in knots. Morning sickness had hit me hard at 6 weeks, but I hadn't told anyone yet about the pregnancy. Then, everything shifted. Vivian, my mother-in-law, placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder and leaned in, whispering something in his ear. I watched in real time as his face shifted from calm to furious in a matter of seconds. The warm brown eyes I had once fallen in love with turned cold, and he turned his gaze on me. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice full of accusation. He stood so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Have you been lying to me?" Before I could even respond, his hand shot out. The slap was so hard, so sudden, that I lost my balance, stumbling back into the wall. My cheek burned, and the room seemed to spin around me as tears welled up in my eyes. And then it happened, the wave I'd been holding back all evening, the one I couldn't control anymore. In front of both of them, I threw up. Ethan took a step back, visibly disgusted, but froze when he noticed something in my purse that had fallen open on the floor. A positive pregnancy test had slipped out. His face drained of color as he looked from the test to me. "Grace, are you—" His voice trailed off, the words unable to form. I reached up to touch my stinging cheek, tears streaming down my face. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm pregnant. I was going to tell you, tonight. That's why I made your favorite dinner." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stared at the pregnancy test, then at his hand, the one he had just used to strike his pregnant wife. Vivian stood frozen, her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line, but even she couldn't hide the shock in her eyes. "Oh my God," Ethan muttered, his voice trembling. "Grace, I... He reached for me, but I flinched away, my body instinctively retreating. The man who had promised to love and protect me had just hit me while I was carrying his child. In that moment, as I watched Ethan wrestle with the horror of what he had just done, it hit me our lives would never be the same. The secret I had wanted to share with Joy had been revealed in the worst way possible. And now, I had to decide. Could I ever trust him again? Could I forgive him? More importantly, could I stay with someone who had shown that he might hurt me and our baby? The sound of a door creaking open startled all of us. Chloe, our next-door neighbor, stood in the doorway, concern written all over her face. "I heard shouting," she said, taking in the scene, my red cheek, Ethan's guilty expression, Vivian's tense posture. "Is everything okay?" I knew, deep down, that nothing was okay, and that nothing would be for a long time. I remember the day I met Ethan as though it was yesterday. It was a Friday afternoon at Carter's coffee shop in downtown Austin. I had been grading papers. Being a third-grade teacher meant that my weekends began with a stack of math worksheets and creative writing assignments. Ethan accidentally spilled his coffee on my students' homework, and his frantic attempts to salvage the papers made me laugh. "I promise I'm not usually this clumsy," he said, desperately dabbing at the papers with napkins. "Please let me make it up to you. Coffee or maybe dinner." That's how it started. Simple, sweet, and completely perfect. Ethan was everything I dreamed of. Successful but humble, funny but responsible. And he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. Our first year of marriage was beautiful. We bought a small house with a backyard, talked about having kids someday, and spent weekends making plans for our future. Then Vivian moved in. "It's just temporary, honey," Ethan assured me. "Mom's having a hard time with the divorce. She needs support right now." I wanted to be understanding. I did. But Vivian had a way of making me feel small in my own home. Nothing I did was ever good enough. The house wasn't clean enough, my cooking wasn't up to her standards, and apparently, I wasn't taking good enough care of her precious son. "Ethan works so hard," she'd say, watching me pack his lunch. "He needs more protein than that," when I was taking care of him. The changes and Ethan were subtle at first. He started criticizing things he'd never noticed before, the way I folded his shirts, the food I cooked, how much time I spent talking to my sister on the phone. Each criticism was preceded by those private, whispered conversations with his mother, and together they were made public. When I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks ago, I should have been overjoyed. Instead, I felt terrified. I hid the morning sickness, making excuses to rush to the bathroom at school. I kept crackers in my desk drawer and blamed my fatigue on end-of-semester stress. I wanted to tell Ethan first, to have just one moment of joy between us before Vivian took over with her opinions on how I should handle my pregnancy. The night of the slap, I'd finally worked up the courage. I'd planned everything perfectly. Ethan's favorite lasagna, his preferred wine, which I wouldn't be drinking, and even bought a little onesie to surprise him with. But Vivian insisted on coming to dinner. "Family dinners are important," she said, inviting herself. I was in the kitchen layering the pasta when I overheard Vivian on the phone. "She's hiding something. I know it. I saw her running to the bathroom at odd hours, probably having an affair. My Ethan deserves better than that." My hands shook as I placed the lasagna in the oven. An affair? Is that what she whispered to Ethan at dinner? Is that why he was so quick to believe the worst about me? Standing in our dining room now with Chloe witnessing the aftermath of what just happened, I felt the weight of every wrong assumption, every whispered lie, every moment I stayed quiet to keep the peace. My hand moved protectively to my stomach. The baby inside me deserved better than this. I deserved better than this. "Grace." Ethan stepped toward me again, his voice breaking. "Please let me explain." But Chloe had already wrapped her arm around my shoulders. "She's coming with me," she said firmly, "and you better not try to stop her." As Chloe led me out of the house, I heard Vivian's voice behind us. "Ethan, darling, she's hysterical. You know how women get in her condition." The door closed behind us, muffling Vivian's words, but the damage was already done. My perfect life had shattered in a single evening, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The next few days at Chloe's house were a blur of tears, nausea, and endless calls from Ethan that I let go to voicemail. Chloe, bless her heart, took care of everything. She went back to my house to get my clothes, called the school to request my sick days, and held my hair back during morning sickness. "Your house isn't a home anymore, Grace," Chloe said one morning, pushing a cup of ginger tea across her kitchen table. "I've watched things get worse over the past 6 months. We all have." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, remembering how things had changed since Vivian moved in. It started with small things. She'd rearrange my kitchen while I was at work, claiming she was helping. She'd make comments about my weight, saying she was concerned about my health. But it was her influence on Ethan that hurt the most. "Remember last month?" Chloe asked gently. "When Ethan skipped your sister's wedding because Vivian said she was feeling too anxious to be alone?" I nodded, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. He didn't even question it, just called my sister and made excuses, while Vivian smirked behind his back. The constant calls and texts from Ethan played like a broken record. "I'm so sorry. Please come home. I'll make it right. I never meant to hurt you." But mixed in with his messages were Vivian's. "You're tearing this family apart. Ethan is devastated because of your dramatics. A good wife would come home and work things out." 1 week after the incident, I had my first prenatal appointment. Chloe came with me, holding my hand as the doctor confirmed I was 6 weeks along. The sound of my baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong and steady. Tears rolled down my cheeks, tears of joy mixed with sadness because Ethan should have been here for this moment. I had always imagined this moment sharing it with my husband and Lily, together. "Do you want me to record it?" Chloe whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. That evening, I sat on Chloe's guest bed staring at my phone. I had promised myself I wouldn't reach out to Ethan, but hearing our baby's heartbeat changed something inside me. With trembling hands, I sent him the recording with a simple message, "Your child's heartbeat." His response came quickly. "Please, can we talk in person?" Without Mom. I glanced at my reflection in Chloe's guest room mirror. The bruise on my cheek had faded to a sickly yellowish green, but the fear in my eyes was still fresh. Could I face him? Should I? My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Vivian. "How dare you send that to him without discussing it with me first? I'm his mother. I should be involved in these decisions." Something snapped within me. 3 years of keeping quiet, of trying to please her, of watching my husband slowly become her puppet, it all boiled over. I typed the words I'd been holding back for so long. "You are not involved in decisions about my baby. Never have been, never will be." I blocked her number before she could respond. A few moments later, Ethan called. This time, I picked up. "She's gone too far," he said. Before I could speak, I heard Vivian on the phone with her friends bragging about how she'd saved me from his supposed affair. "She made it all up, Grace, and God, I believed her. I hit you because I believed her lies." His voice cracked. I could hear him crying. "I need you to choose, Ethan," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Either your mother moves out, or I'm not coming back. And if I don't come back, I'll be talking to a lawyer about full custody. I won't raise our child in a home with violence." The silence on the other end felt like it stretched for hours, and for a moment, I thought he had hung up. Finally, he spoke. "Can you meet me tomorrow at Carter's coffee shop where we first met? Mom won't be there, I promise. I need to see you." I looked down at my stomach, still flat but carrying our future. "Okay," I whispered. "Tomorrow at 2:00. But Ethan, if she shows up, I'm done. Forever." "She won't," he said, his voice firm. "I'm choosing you, Grace. I should have chosen you all along." As I ended the call, I wasn't sure if I believed him, but for the sake of our baby, I had to try. I stood up, leaving my seat beside Chloe, and made my way to Carter's coffee shop. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart pounding in my chest. The familiar smell of coffee beans, which had once comforted me, now made my stomach churn. I chose a table near the door, an easy escape route if things went wrong. Chloe was parked across the street, ready to intervene if needed. At exactly 2:00, the bell above the door chimed. Ethan walked in alone, just as promised. He looked terrible unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same blue button-down shirt he had worn the night of the incident. My body tensed as he approached, but he stopped a few feet from the table, respecting my space. "Can I sit?" he asked softly. I nodded, watching as he sank into the chair across from me, his eyes fixed on my stomach, then darted away guiltily. "I kicked her out," he said without preamble. "Last night, she's staying at a hotel." I wrapped my hands around my untouched tea. "Just like that?" "No," he admitted. "She screamed, cried, and told me I was abandoning her, said I was choosing He swallowed hard. "I can't even repeat what she called you, but I packed her bags myself, told her if she didn't leave, I'd call the police." A couple at the next table glanced our way. I lowered my voice. "Why now, Ethan? Why not after all the other times she hurt me?" "Because I became her." His voice cracked. "When I hit you, I became everything I hated about her. Controlling, violent, ready to believe the worst." He wiped his eyes roughly. The sound of your head hitting the wall keeps playing in my mind, and then seeing that pregnancy test? He choked back a sob. The barista called out someone's order, making me jump. Ethan noticed and flinched at my reaction. I'm scared of you, I admitted quietly. Do you understand that? I'm carrying your child, and I'm scared of you. You should be, he whispered. What I did, there's no excuse. But Grace, please believe me, it will never happen again. I'm starting therapy tomorrow. I've already had my first consultation. I need to understand why I let her control me, why I became this person I don't recognize. I took a shaky breath. I have conditions, Ethan, non-negotiable ones. He leaned forward. Anything. Vivian never sets foot in our house again. No holidays, no visits, nothing. She gets no information about the baby, no photos, no updates, nothing. Done, he said immediately. You continue therapy. We also do couples counseling. And if you ever raise a hand to me again, I'm gone. No discussions, no second chances. I'll press charges and file for full custody. Her fingers clenched into a fist. I understand. He reached for his phone, pulling up an email. I've already found a couples counselor. And he slid a business card across the table. This is my lawyer. I've asked her to draw up papers giving you full custody if I ever become violent again. One incident, that's all it would take. The papers are being prepared now. My hand trembled as I picked up the card. You're serious about this? I love you, Grace. I love our baby, and I hate myself for what I did. He looked down at his hands. When I heard that heartbeat, I realized I was becoming the kind of father I never wanted to be, the kind that makes their child afraid. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken fears and hopes. Finally, I spoke. I'm not coming home today, I said. I need time, and we start couples counseling first. He nodded, relief visible on his face. Would it be okay if I came to the next doctor's appointment? For the first time since that horrible night, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Yes, I said, but Chloe comes too. Of course, he agreed quickly. Whatever you need to feel safe. As we sat there, the afternoon light streaming through the coffee shop windows, I realized we were at a crossroads. The path forward would be hard, filled with counseling sessions and rebuilding trust, but at least now there was a path. The next 2 weeks were a strange dance of careful boundaries and small steps forward. Ethan attended his therapy sessions twice a week, sending me photos of his check-ins at the therapist's office. Dr. Martinez, our couples counselor, helped us start rebuilding mainly through supervised sessions where we learned to communicate without Vivian's toxic influence. But Vivian wasn't going quietly. Ethan, your mother's outside my classroom again, I texted him one Tuesday morning. Through the window, I could see her sitting in her silver Mercedes, watching the school entrance. My third graders were at recess, but my hands shook as I typed. His response was immediate. Don't move. I'm calling the police. 15 minutes later, I watched through my classroom window as 2 police officers approached Vivian's car. She played the perfect victim. Tears, trembling hands, just a concerned mother worried about her son's marriage. But when they told her to leave, her mask slipped. She's poisoning my son against me, she screamed, loud enough that I could hear her through the closed windows. She trapped him with that baby. My classroom aide, Ashley, placed a protective hand on my shoulder. Want me to film this? She whispered. Might be useful for that restraining order you mentioned. I nodded, grateful for her quick thinking. That evening during our counseling session, Ethan broke down when I showed him the video. I never saw it before, he said, his voice hollow. How she really is. She acted exactly like she did when Dad left, screaming, making accusations, playing the victim. And he looked at Dr. Martinez. I always believed her version of everything. The generational pattern of abuse is strong. Dr. Martinez said gently, her tone calm yet firm. But Ethan, you're breaking it. Every time you choose Grace and your child over your mother's manipulation, you're breaking it. Later that week, we had another prenatal appointment. Chloe drove me there, with Ethan following in his car, a new safety measure we'd put in place. The ultrasound technician guided us through the scan, and for the first time since that night, Ethan reached out and took my hand. I let him. "Would you like to know the gender?" the technician asked, her voice warm. Ethan looked at me, silently asking for permission. I nodded. "It's a girl," the technician smiled, pointing to our baby's tiny form on the screen. "A girl," I whispered, placing my free hand on my stomach protectively. Looking at Ethan, I could see the same thought in his eyes. Our daughter would never know the fear of living in a home where love was conditional, where manipulation and violence had been the norm. That evening, as Chloe and I were leaving the clinic, we found Vivian waiting in the parking lot. Before I could react, Ethan stepped between us, his body a barrier. "Leave," he said, his voice cold but resolute. "Now, or I'm calling the police again." "I have a right to know about my granddaughter." Vivian's voice rose, laced with hysteria. She must have been eavesdropping through the clinic walls. "No, you don't," Ethan replied, his tone firm like steel. "You lost that right the moment you made me hurt her mother." Vivian's face twisted with fury. "I never made you do anything. She's turning you against me just like your father." "Security is on their way," Chloe interrupted, holding up her phone. "They've been instructed to call the police immediately if you don't leave." Vivian's eyes flashed with rage, but she finally backed away toward her car. "This isn't over," she shouted. "That's my grandbaby." As Vivian retreated, Chloe turned to me with a reassuring smile, but my chest felt heavy. That night in Chloe's guest room, I finally allowed myself to break down. Ethan sat just outside the door. We weren't quite ready for him to stay the night yet, but he refused to leave me alone after Vivian's outburst. "I've filed for the restraining order," he said softly through the door. "For all three of us, you, me, and the baby. My lawyer says with the school video and the clinic incident, we'll get it." I pressed my hand against the door, feeling his presence on the other side, mirroring my gesture. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw, "for everything I put you through, for every time I didn't protect you, for every time I chose her over you." "I know," I said softly, "but Ethan, I need you to understand something. Anything, I'm not doing this for us. I'm doing it for her." I touched my growing belly. "She deserves better than what we had." "Yes," he agreed. "She does, and I swear, Grace, she'll have it. We'll give her everything we never had. Safety, trust, love without condition." For the first time in weeks, I believed him. The restraining order came through a week later. 3 months, renewable based on behavior. Seeing it in writing, Vivian Matthews must maintain a distance of at least 500 feet, made it real. We were doing this. Ethan and I continued our separate therapy sessions, meeting twice a week with Dr. Martinez for couples counseling. Slowly, painfully, we began to unpack years of manipulation and control. "Tell me about the first time you noticed Vivian's influence changing your behavior," Dr. Martinez asked Ethan during one session. He rubbed his face, thinking. 2 months after our wedding, Grace made this beautiful birthday dinner for me, but Mom had already surprised me with lunch. She knew about the dinner, Grace had told her. When I got home, she started saying how worried she was about Grace wasting money on expensive ingredients when she'd already fed me. "And what did you do?" Dr. Martinez prompted. "I dot." He looked at me, shame in his eyes. "I complained about the dinner, said we needed to be more careful with money. Grace had spent her teaching salary on those ingredients. Grace complained a lot, and I began to agree with her that David was not the type to make poor decisions like this. I remember that night. I'd thrown the whole meal away crying in the kitchen while Ethan and Vivian watched TV in the living room. The old patterns run deep," Dr. Martinez explained. but recognition is the first step to change. By my 5th month, we felt ready for me to move back home. Chloe helped me pack, still unsure. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, folding my maternity clothes. "No," I admitted, "but I need to try, for her." I touched my growing belly. The house felt different when I returned. Vivian's things were gone. Her photos, her decorative plates, her passive-aggressive sticky notes about cleaning. Ethan had repainted the walls in soft yellows and greens, colors we chose together for the nursery. "I got rid of the dining room set," he said quietly. "Bought a new one. I didn't want you to have to look at that table every day." The new table was round, warm oak instead of Vivian's formal mahogany. No hierarchy, no head of the table where she used to hold court. Instead, we developed new routines. Ethan would text before coming home, giving me time to prepare for his arrival. We cooked together, instead of letting me handle all the meals. Every decision about the baby was made jointly with no outside input. The first test came at 7 months. Vivian sent a baby gift to my school, an expensive silver rattle with a note claiming that family heirlooms can't be kept away by restraining orders. Ethan took it straight to our lawyer. "She's testing boundaries," he said, making sure we know she's still watching. The rattle was returned through legal channels with a warning about violating the restraining order. That night, Ethan held me as I cried. "What if she never stops?" I whispered. "What if our daughter has to grow up looking over her shoulder?" "Then we'll protect her," he said firmly. "Every day, every time. I won't fail her like I failed you." Dr. Martinez helped us make a safety plan. Passwords for daycare pickup, security cameras for the house, a list of protected contacts who could help in emergencies. As my due date approached, we faced another challenge, the hospital birth plan. Vivian had somehow discovered which hospital I'd registered at. "We need to change hospitals," Ethan said, showing me the message his mother had sent through his cousin. "She's already trying to get information from the maternity ward." So we switched, registered under Chloe's address, and made sure every hospital staff member knew about the restraining order. It felt extreme, but seeing Ethan take these steps to protect us helped rebuild my trust in him. "You're doing the work, Doctor," Martinez said in one of our last sessions before my due date. "Both of you. That's what matters." Looking around our reformed home, at the nursery we'd built together, at the man Ethan was becoming without his mother's influence, I finally felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Labor started at 2 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday. Ethan called Chloe first, then followed our practiced plan. Hospital bag, car seat ready, security cameras checked, no signs of Vivian's Mercedes anywhere near our home. The delivery room was calm, nothing like the chaos I'd feared. Ethan stayed by my head, holding my hand and whispering encouragement. Chloe guarded the door, our self-appointed sentinel. After 12 hours of labor, our daughter, Lily Grace, entered the world, screaming her little lungs out. "She is perfect," Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She looks just like you." As I held Lily for the first time, I studied her tiny features, my dark hair, Ethan's nose, 10 perfect fingers and toes. She was everything we'd fought for, everything we'd protected. The first test came sooner than we anticipated. A flower delivery arrived at the hospital, addressed to "My first granddaughter Lily." Ethan intercepted it before it reached our room. The card read, "Blood is thicker than water. She'll need her grandmother soon enough." Instead of hiding it from me, Ethan showed me the card. "No more secrets," he said firmly, ripping it up in front of me. "We handle everything together now." The hospital security doubled their rounds. Chloe's partner, Tom, a police officer, volunteered to stay outside our door during the night shift. We were surrounded by protection people who understood our need for safety and peace. Coming home wasn't anything like I'd imagined during my pregnancy. Ethan had installed new security cameras, changed all the locks, and added extra lighting around the house. But inside it was just us, our little family of 3. Welcome home, Lily, I whispered softly as I carried her into the nursery we had created together. The room was a sanctuary painted in soft colors, filled with books and stuffed animals we had both carefully chosen. The first few weeks blurred together with midnight feedings and endless diaper changes. Ethan had taken extended paternity leave, showing his commitment to being present every step of the way. We were crafting our parenting style, free from Vivian's critical voice and manipulation. At Lily's 1-month checkup, our pediatrician smiled warmly at us. "She's thriving," she said. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." That evening, as we sat in the nursery with Lily peacefully asleep in her crib, Ethan took my hand. "I saw Mom today," he said quietly. "At the grocery store. I was picking up more diapers." My heart stopped. "What happened?" "She tried to approach me, asked about Lily," he said, squeezing my hand. I walked away, called security, followed our plan. I released the breath I had been holding. "And how do you feel?" "Sad," he admitted, his voice heavy, "but certain. Our daughter will never know that kind of love, the kind that hurts, the kind that controls. She'll only know the real thing." I looked down at our daughter, sleeping soundly in her crib, and knew he was right. The cycle was broken. Our home was filled with a different kind of love now, the kind that protected instead of controlled, the kind that built up instead of tearing down. Lily stirred in her sleep, making the tiny baby noises that melted our hearts. Ethan and I sat there, hands still linked, watching her. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" I asked, my voice soft. "For giving me a second chance. For showing me what a real family looks like." For her, I leaned against his shoulder, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. "We did it together," I said quietly, "and we'll keep doing it. Every day." For her outside, the sun was setting on another day in our new life, a life we had fought for, a life we would continue to protect, a life where our daughter would grow up knowing only love and never fear, and that made every struggle, every tear, every difficult decision worth it. So, with everything that's happened, can I truly trust and go back to Ethan? Can he change to become the husband I've always hoped for, or is this just a wound that can never heal? From a logical and analytical perspective, this relationship is facing a huge challenge. Ethan's actions were not a one-time accident, but rather the result of a long chain of events, especially the influence from his mother. The controlling behavior and patterns built over time will not change overnight, no matter how many promises he makes. In this case, Ethan may feel guilty and want to make things right, but that doesn't mean change will happen instantly. Changing behavior, especially when it's been heavily influenced by family dynamics, is a long process that requires patience. He'll have to prove himself through actions, not just words. However, the most important factor is the trust between them. Can Grace accept starting over, knowing that Ethan has hurt her and that the wound can't be completely erased? This is a question that will take time to answer. This story also emphasizes that every relationship needs respect and mutual protection. No one can change unless they fully acknowledge their mistakes and take concrete steps to fix them. What do you think about forgiving and giving a chance to change after being hurt? Is change a process or just empty promises? Share your thoughts.
I'm Adeline, a 38-year-old who works at an internet bank. My story isn't what you might expect from someone who grew up in a mansion. My father, a successful asset manager, taught me the real value of money. He believed it wasn't just for spending but for managing wisely. Despite our wealth, we lived simply. My allowance was small and we rarely ate at fancy restaurants. School was where I felt the weight of our wealth the most. My classmates always thought I had it all. "Adeline, your house is big. You must be rich," they'd say. They thought I had every toy and game, but I didn't. My parents were strict about money. They wanted me to understand its value, not just spend it. One day, a girl in my class, Valerie, asked me for money. She had broken someone else's game console and needed to pay for it. I wanted to help, but my parents had a firm rule: no lending money. I can't, I told Valerie. My parents don't allow me to lend money. She left in tears, and soon after, rumors started. Valerie and her friend Alicia told everyone that I was a rich girl who wouldn't help a friend in need. The rumors hurt, but eventually the truth came out. My teacher stepped in, and Valerie and Alicia were warned about spreading lies. That evening I told my dad about it. He said something I'll never forget. Money is a tool, not a measure of worth. Stick to your principles. His words stuck with me. From then on, I was careful about who I let into my life. I chose friends who shared my values, not just those impressed by my family's wealth. As I grew older, I carried these lessons with me. They guided my choices in friends, my career, and even in love. But I didn't realize how much these lessons would matter until I met Roman. He seemed honest at first, but his interest in my family's money would soon test everything I believed in. I met Roman when I was 28. He was introduced to me by a friend, and he seemed different from anyone I'd ever met. Roman was a year younger than me and had a way of making everyone around him feel at ease. He was open about everything, which I found refreshing. Despite his youthful appearance, there was something mature about him that drew me in. We dated for 2 years, and they were some of the happiest times of my life. Roman had a charm that made life seem simple and joyous. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. My parents were overjoyed. "It's about time," my mom said, smiling. "We were starting to worry you'd never find the right person." Our wedding was a big affair. My parents insisted on it. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event," they said. Roman agreed, saying we should make the most of it. The day was perfect, full of laughter, dancing, and celebration with our families and friends. But after we got married, things slowly started to change. About a month later, my father suggested we invite Roman over to our family home. I had been hesitant to bring him there, fearing he might share too much about my family's wealth. But after a month of marriage, I thought it was time to open up more about my life. When Roman first saw our home, his reaction was more intense than I'd expected. "Your family is so wealthy," he kept saying. It made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off as initial surprise. As time went on, Roman's fascination with my family's wealth grew. He would often ask about our assets and finances. I tried to downplay it, but he seemed increasingly curious. Then, a few months later, my world turned upside down. My mother called to tell me my father was going to be hospitalized. "He hasn't been well lately," she said. I remembered how he hadn't eaten much during our last visit. The news hit me hard. I loved my father dearly, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Roman was supportive at first. He offered to help and be there for me. But his support soon turned into an unhealthy interest in my father's health and our financial situation. "It's important to plan for the future," he'd say, but the way he talked about it made me uneasy. It was like he was more interested in what would happen to my father's money than in my father's health. It was then that I started to see the cracks in our marriage. Roman's true intentions began to surface, and I realized that the man I married might not be who I thought he was. The day we learned about my father's illness was a day I'll never forget. It was pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor said it was too advanced for surgery. I remember standing there in the hospital, feeling like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. My mother was in tears, and I was struggling to process the news. My father had always been the pillar of our family, and now he was facing this. During the following months, I spent as much time as I could with my father. His health deteriorated quickly, and it pained me to see him so weak. He talked about the house a lot, how he wanted me to keep it alive with memories and joy. "Invite friends and family," he'd say. "Make it a place of happiness." I promised him I would. After my father passed away, the reality of dealing with his estate hit me. He had left the family mansion to me, a property worth $4.5 million. It was a part of him, a part of our family history. But when Roman learned about the inheritance, his behavior changed drastically. He became obsessed with the mansion and its value. "We should move in," he said excitedly one day. "It's what you deserve." But I didn't want to live there. It was too big, too full of memories of a time that was now past. I wanted to honor my father's wish to make it a place of happiness, but not like this. Roman couldn't understand. He thought I was being irrational, wasteful even. "Why keep it if you're not going to use it?" he argued. It was as if he saw the mansion only as a symbol of wealth, not as the home where I had grown up, where my parents had loved and laughed. His fixation on the mansion put a strain on our relationship. We started arguing more. I felt like he was more interested in my inheritance than in me or my feelings. It was a side of Roman I had never seen when we were dating, and it scared me. The man I thought I knew, the man I married, seemed like a stranger to me now. The more I tried to explain my feelings, the less he seemed to understand. He started talking about the future, our future, but it was all tied to the mansion, to the money. It was as if my father's death and my grief were just obstacles in the way of his plans. I felt trapped, torn between honoring my father's legacy and dealing with a husband whose values seemed so different from my own. I never imagined that my father's passing would reveal such a gaping rift in my marriage, but there it was, growing wider each day, filled with misunderstandings and a greed I never knew existed in Roman. In the months following my father's passing, the tension between Roman and me reached a breaking point. His obsession with the mansion and my inheritance grew each day, overshadowing the grief and loss I was struggling with. Conversations that used to be filled with warmth and love were now cold, revolving around assets, wills, and property. One evening, Roman brought up the mansion again. We should at least discuss what to do with it, he insisted. I tried to explain my wish to keep the mansion as a place of joy and memory, as my father wanted. But Roman wouldn't listen. His eyes had a hard glint that I hadn't seen before. The next day I found documents on the dining table, legal papers claiming a change in ownership of the mansion. My heart stopped. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Roman's response was cold and calculated. "I've taken care of things. The mansion is now in my name. It's better this way." I couldn't believe it. How could he? Betrayal burned through me. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "This is my family home, my inheritance. You can't just take it away from me." But Roman was unmoved. "It's for our future, Adeline," he said. "You'll thank me one day." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The man sleeping beside me felt like a stranger. The trust and love I had for him were replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. I realized I couldn't stay in this marriage. It was not just about the mansion or the money. It was about respect, trust, and understanding, all of which had been shattered. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, documents, and painful decisions. I filed for divorce, a decision that weighed heavily on me, but felt like the only path to take. The house, once a symbol of family and love, had become a battleground of greed and betrayal. As the divorce proceedings progressed, I started to see the extent of Roman's manipulation. He had planned this for months, seeking advice from financial planners and lawyers on how to claim my inheritance. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by someone whose greed knew no bounds. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. I had lost my father and my marriage, but I had gained a painful but important lesson. I needed to protect my family's legacy and honor my father's memory in a way that was true to his values and mine. The mansion, now rightfully back in my name, stood empty. As I walked through its quiet halls, I knew I had to find a way to fill it with life and joy again, to make it a home, not just a house. But first, I had to rebuild my own life piece by piece, starting with saying goodbye to Roman and the life we had planned together. The divorce marked the end of a painful chapter in my life, but it was also the beginning of a journey to rediscover who I was before Roman. The mansion, once a symbol of familial love, had become a reminder of betrayal and loss. I couldn't bring myself to live there, yet I couldn't bear the thought of selling it. It was a part of my father, a part of me. I spent the next few months trying to piece my life back together. Work became my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in numbers and data, away from the complexities of emotions and relationships. But every evening when I returned to my small apartment, the loneliness was waiting. The empty walls echoed with the memories of my father's laughter and my mother's gentle advice. They reminded me of a time when life was simpler, happier. I longed for those days, but I knew they were gone, replaced by a reality where trust was hard to come by, and love seemed like a distant dream. One day, as I was going through some of my father's belongings, I found an old photo album. Page after page, I saw pictures of our family in the mansion, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. Each photo was a memory, a moment of joy. My father's words came back to me, make it a place of happiness. That's when it hit me. I didn't have to sell the mansion. I could turn it into something that would honor my father's memory and bring joy to others. I decided to transform it into a boutique hotel, a place where families and friends could come together and create their own happy memories. The decision brought a new purpose to my life. I threw myself into the project, working with architects and designers to bring my vision to life. It was a daunting task, but also an exhilarating one. With each passing day, the mansion began to transform, and so did I. As the grand opening of the hotel approached, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. I had turned a place of sorrow into one of joy, just as my father had wanted. In doing so, I had found a way to move forward, to build a new life on my own terms. The hotel was a success, loved by guests for its charm and history. I found joy in the laughter and happiness of the families who stayed there. It was as if the mansion had come back to life, filled with love and joy once again. But as I stood in the hotel lobby watching guests come and go, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. The mansion was no longer my home, but it had given me something else. A sense of purpose and a connection to my father that would never be lost. The success of the boutique hotel brought a sense of peace and accomplishment, but it couldn't erase the lingering shadows of the past. Roman, despite our divorce, seemed unwilling to let go. His attempts to reach out at first through calls and then through unannounced visits became a source of constant stress. One evening, as I was overseeing the hotel's operations, I received a call from the front desk. "Miss Adeline, there's a man here insisting on seeing you," the receptionist said. "He says his name is Roman." My heart sank. I had hoped that with time he would move on, but it seemed he was still clinging to the idea of us, or perhaps to the wealth he thought he could have had. As I approached the lobby, I saw him looking much the same as he did when we first met, yet so different. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a mix of desperation and resentment. "Adeline, we need to talk," he began. "Roman, there's nothing left to say," I cut him off. "We're divorced. You need to accept that and move on. Please, just hear me out," he pleaded. "No, Roman, the man I loved is gone. You're a stranger to me now," I said firmly. "I want you to leave. You're not welcome here. This place, this life, it's not yours. It's mine, and I won't let you or anyone else threaten it," I concluded. Security escorted him out, and as he left I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I had faced him and stood my ground. The hotel, the mansion, my life, they were mine, and I was free to live them as I saw fit. In the days that followed, I found a new sense of clarity and purpose. My father's dream for the mansion had been realized, and in doing so I had found my own path. I had lost much, but I had also gained so much more: strength, independence, and a deeper understanding of who I was and what I valued. The boutique hotel thrived, and with it, so did I. Guests came and went, each leaving their mark, adding to the tapestry of memories the mansion held. In each smile, each thank you, I felt my father's presence, a reminder that even in loss, there is the potential for new beginnings and unexpected joy. As I walked through the halls of the boutique hotel that was once my childhood home, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. The walls, once echoing with the sorrow of my past, now resonated with the laughter and joy of guests. In transforming the mansion, I had not only preserved my father's legacy, but had also discovered my own strength and resilience. I found solace in the daily routines of the hotel, in the interactions with guests who came to celebrate, relax, or just escape. Each room, once a part of my family's life, now held stories of others, stories of love, friendship, and adventure. It was as if the mansion had a life of its own, continually evolving and growing with each guest that passed through its doors. But it wasn't just the hotel that had undergone a transformation. I had changed too. The naive girl who once believed in fairy tales had grown into a woman who understood the complexities of life. I had learned that trust must be earned, not given freely, and that true strength comes from within. My evenings were no longer spent in loneliness, but in planning and dreaming of the future. The hotel was not just a business, it was a project of love, a tribute to my father's memory, and a symbol of my journey from loss to empowerment. Sometimes I would walk in the garden where my father and I used to spend hours talking and dreaming. I could almost hear his voice in the rustling leaves, see his smile in the blooming flowers. "You've done well, Adeline," I could imagine him saying. In those moments, I felt a connection to him that transcended time and space. The boutique hotel became more than just a place to stay. It became a part of the community, a place where memories were made and cherished. I often hosted events for local charities and community groups, continuing my family's legacy of giving back. As I looked to the future, I knew there would be more challenges, more lessons to learn, but I also knew that I had the strength and wisdom to face them. My father's values, instilled in me from a young age, were now a part of who I was. They guided me in every decision, every step I took. The story of the mansion, my story, was one of transformation, of finding light in the darkness, of turning loss into hope. It was a story I would continue to write, day by day, guest by guest, memory by memory. And so, as I turned the page to the next chapter of my life, I did so with a heart full of gratitude and a spirit renewed. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and purpose. The boutique hotel, my father's legacy, was now a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always a path forward, always a chance for renewal and joy. My name is Harper. It's been a year since I got married to my husband, Grayson. Although we don't work at the same company, we met through work. We both have decent salaries, and since our married life has settled down, we've been thinking about buying a house. We've been living in a rented apartment until now, and maybe it's time to buy a house. Our parents' homes are not far from where we currently live, both about a 30-minute drive away. Neither set of parents was intrusive, so we were able to enjoy our time together without worrying about in-laws. As we started seriously considering getting our own home, I casually mentioned it to my parents. They offered to let us use the land they owned. While my parents weren't rich, both my father and mother grew up in relatively well-off families. They both lived comfortably as only children and received a lot of land from their parents and a substantial inheritance from my mother's parents. My parents raised me without any hardships and instilled a sense of discipline in me. Now that I'm married and living away from them, they want to support us in any way they can. That's why they brought up the land offer. I immediately told my husband about it, and building a house on my parents' land became one of our options. From that point on, we started seriously considering our future home. Whenever our schedules aligned, we visited show homes or toured new apartments. We had many opportunities to discuss what kind of house we wanted to live in. What kind of living room would be nice? How many children did we envision having, and how many rooms should we plan for? Did we need separate workplaces for ourselves? Although we had some conflicting opinions due to our individual preferences, I really enjoyed being able to have these discussions with my husband about our future. One day while we were visiting a show home, my husband's phone rang. It was a call from my mother-in-law. "Where are you right now?" she asked. "We're at a show home," Grayson replied. A few days later, my mother-in-law called him again after finding out about our plans to build a new house. "Hey, since you're planning to build a new house, why don't you make it a two-family home? I think it would be great if we lived next to each other." Grayson seemed confused by her sudden request and responded, "It's difficult when you bring it up out of the blue." However, my mother-in-law persisted. "You know it's convenient to have parents nearby, especially as we are getting older. It's reassuring for us to be close to younger people in case something happens." She seemed troubled as she pushed the idea. In the end, Grayson lightly evaded the situation and said, "Well, that may be true. We'll think about it." He then quickly ended the call. To be honest, the option of having a two-family home hadn't even crossed our minds. We were taken aback by my mother-in-law suddenly suggesting such a thing, and it left us feeling perplexed. The following weekend, we were invited by my mother-in-law to have dinner together at their house. We had received such invitations once every few months, so we headed to my in-laws' house as usual. Upon arrival, my mother-in-law brought up the topic again. "Hey, about the previous discussion, have you given it any thought? Building a two-family home?" Grayson looked awkward and tried to divert the conversation. Oh well. But my mother-in-law had no intention of giving up. She continued persistently. Talk to your father about it. If you decide to build a two-family home, we'll contribute financially. It will be reassuring for everyone to live together, right, Harper? This time she smiled at me and looked my way. Caught off guard, I blurted out an answer without thinking. Yes, I suppose so. My mother-in-law then turned to Grayson and said, See, Harper agrees too. She started pressuring him intensely. I deeply regretted my impromptu response, as I never expected her to bring me into the conversation. Personally, I didn't feel the need to live any closer to either set of parents, considering they are already not too far away. However, my in-laws seemed very excited about the idea. When are you planning to build? Make sure to have spacious rooms, okay? They started adding more and more requests to the discussion. After returning home, I asked Grayson, Hey, things seem to be progressing on their own. What should we do? He gave a troubled response. It's a dilemma. What about you, Harper? If we do decide to build, we'll have to borrow your parents' land. He brought up a valid point. I didn't dislike my in-laws, so as long as it wasn't a complete confrontation, it might be fine, I thought casually. Considering that my in-laws were getting older, it was undeniable that having them nearby would bring a sense of security in case anything happened. Moreover, if we were to have children in the future, having grandparents nearby could be a favorable environment. My husband and I had a serious discussion about these aspects. Additionally, my mother-in-law frequently contacted us to passionately express how much they wanted to live together with us. Unable to resist my mother-in-law's persistence, my husband and I decided to build a two-family home, borrowing my parents' land. When we conveyed this decision to my in-laws, they were overjoyed, as expected. Now we can feel at ease no matter what happens, my mother-in-law said with a smile. Overwhelmed by their happiness, both my husband and I thought it was a good decision to go for a two-family home. Soon after, preparations began immediately, and the architectural plans gradually took shape. The interior style, room layout, and size were being determined one after another, and I couldn't help but feel excited. In the end, it was decided that we would contribute half of the funds, while the other half would come from my in-laws. My husband and I used our savings for the down payment and took out a loan from the bank for the rest. And so, the construction of our long-awaited dream home began. Ideally, at this stage, we should have taken care of the financial matters thoroughly. However, none of the money that my in-laws had promised to pay was being transferred. Being the first to notice, I informed my husband, Hey, it seems like the money from your parents hasn't been transferred yet. Huh, seriously? Grayson seemed caught off guard by the news, and quickly called his parents, urging them to wire the money as soon as possible. However, my mother-in-law responded, We've already made various preparations on our end. Could you hold off and cover our share? Pretty please? We'll pay it back in full later. With that, she hung up the phone. Since my in-laws had said they could pay their share, we had already taken out a loan from the bank, subtracting their portion. That's why it would be a problem if they didn't follow through with the transfer. Grayson became frustrated with his parents' attitude and made several more attempts to contact them, but my mother-in-law insisted, It's not possible right now. Please wait for the time being. And the conversation went nowhere. Helplessly, I visited my parents' home and explained the situation in detail. Maybe we can put it on hold and consult with the construction company, I suggested. To that, my parents replied, We'll cover your in-laws' share. There's no way you and your husband should give up your long-awaited dream home. Saying that, they paid the money that was supposed to come from my in-laws in one lump sum. Thanks to my parents, the construction progressed as planned, and a few months later, our long-awaited dream home was successfully completed. Upon learning about it, my in-laws moved in before us and started inviting acquaintances over almost every day. Since it was a two-family house, it didn't affect us much. But from the snippets of conversation we overheard, it seemed like they were boasting as if they had built the house themselves, continuously seeking validation from others. Both my husband and I were disgusted by their attitude, but we also felt responsible for agreeing to build a two-family house in the first place, so we silently endured it. However, even after a month had passed since the move, my in-laws had not paid us for the house. My husband, unable to bear it any longer, expressed his frustration. "Mom, Dad, enough is enough. When are you going to pay?" But my mother-in-law evaded the question as always. "We'll pay, don't worry, just a little longer." Despite 2 or 3 months passing by, there was no sign that my in-laws intended to pay us. I had relied on my parents' support to cover the cost, so I turned to my husband and pleaded, "Do you think your parents might consider paying us soon?" "I've been asking them every day too," he replied, looking troubled and apologetic. Realizing that this situation was unfair to my parents, I decided to approach my parents-in-law directly. "Mom, Dad, sorry to bring this up, but my parents covered the amount you had to pay. It's been over 3 months since we moved in, so could you please settle the payment?" My father-in-law sighed and responded, "If you keep nagging like this, it makes me not want to pay at all, you know." He didn't say anything specific, leaving me puzzled. Besides, the mother-in-law said, "We also have something to discuss." Disregarding my husband's plea to keep the conversation on track, she moved on to another topic. "Don't change the subject," my husband insisted, but she completely disregarded his words. My mother-in-law continued, "Since Karen and her family will be living here together with us starting tomorrow, I want you two to move out." Huh? Both my husband and I couldn't help but let out a dumbfounded response to my mother-in-law's unexpected statement. Karen is my husband's older sister and would be considered my sister-in-law. She's married and has 2 children, my mother-in-law stated. I was speechless and perplexed. My husband regained his composure and confronted his mother. "Why would Karen suddenly move in? It has nothing to do with the current situation, right?" My mother-in-law let out a deep sigh and explained, "Karen's husband lost his job and they were kicked out of their apartment. They have nowhere else to go, so I invited them to stay here." Both my husband and I were stunned. Why did she decide something like this without consulting us? It was utterly unreasonable and unacceptable. To make matters worse, she added, "But you know, Karen's family has children too. It will be difficult for us to accommodate 4 more people, so I thought it would be best if you two moved out." She said such a thing, asking us to leave the house we built. What was she thinking? Stunned by the absurdity of the situation, I sat there in disbelief as my husband stood up. "Enough is enough. Why do we have to leave our own home? And to top it off, you're letting your sister's family move in without even consulting us. It's just not right." Seeing my usually mild-mannered husband this angry was a first for me. However, my father-in-law responded with an exasperated expression, saying, "Oh well, you two will be fine, won't you? If anything happens, Harper's parents will help you out." He said that with a smirk on his face. The next day, my sister-in-law's family moved in with a lot of baggage. There wasn't a single word of apology or gratitude from them. "Oh, aren't you two leaving?" Karen remarked, staring at us with annoyance. Unable to bear it any longer, I finally reached my breaking point and discussed it with my husband. We packed up the bigger essentials and left the house. Enough was enough. We returned to my parents' house and explained the situation, apologizing for the inconvenience caused by the delayed payment. Our own house was no longer habitable, and we didn't know what to do. As I cried and sought advice, my parents smiled and reassured us, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." I thought it was just a comforting statement to ease our worries at the time. But my parents immediately began discussing something and made phone calls. A few days later, my mother said, "I'm ready, let's go together." Saying that, she took my husband and me to our house. When she rang the intercom, my mother-in-law came out, and as soon as she saw my husband and me, she said, "Just in time, your stuff was in the way." However, when she noticed my parents behind us, hello, she greeted us awkwardly. Then my father turned to her. "We have something to discuss. Can you take your mind off it for a while?" he said with a smile. My mother-in-law, of course smiling, said, Sure." Reluctantly, she led us into the house. My husband, my parents, and I sat across from my in-laws and sister-in-law. "What is this about?" my sister-in-law asked my parents with an annoyed expression. Then my father spoke firmly. "We would like you to leave this house." He said it decisively. "You do know that the land on which this house stands is under my name, don't you?" My father-in-law responded, "I know, but what's the point?" My mother-in-law replied. At that moment, my mother interjected. "You also know that the title of this house is in my name," she said. Upon hearing that statement, my in-laws widened their eyes. "The house is in the name of the mother of our daughter-in-law." They were flustered. So this house was built under my mother's name. My parents built it in their name for the sake of any future event, saying, "You only need to pay the loan." Initially, my mother had plenty of inheritance from my grandparents, and she even said she would use that money to build our house. However, after discussing it with my husband, we felt it would be unfair, so we asked for the title to be in their name only. Of course, we hadn't told my in-laws about this, so they seemed very surprised. In other words, this house is mine, and the land belongs to my husband. You have no right to live here without our permission. Do you understand? My mother said it with a smile and gently, but I don't think there was any laughter in her eyes. My usually kind parents seemed to exude a formidable determination at this moment. Then my sister-in-law said, "Hey, what are we going to do? It'll be a problem if we can't live here." She confronted my in-laws, and my in-laws were at a loss for what to do. Finally, my father said, "If you insist on staying, even in this situation, I will report it to the police." "The police, please don't do that," my in-laws desperately pleaded. "You should say something too." My sister-in-law began to get angry at her husband, and I told her firmly, "Please go away." In the end, my father presented them with the ultimatum, "If you don't leave within 2 days, I will contact the police." Upon hearing this, my in-laws and sister-in-law had to relent, and they left on the said 2 days. My sister-in-law's husband said to us, "We have children here too, you heartless people." But that's none of our concern. In the end, the 2-family house we built became the home for our family. My husband, me, and my parents. My parents chose to sell the house they originally lived in and lived with us. Since then, my husband has completely cut ties with his relatives. It seems he even deleted all their contact information. I received a few messages from them afterward, but with my husband's advice, I also blocked their calls. Since then, we have been leading peaceful days together with my parents. A year later, we were blessed with a child, and having my parents around has been a great support. Since the day they were born, my parents have helped us in every way possible, and I'm truly grateful. From now on, I want to cherish my parents and repay their kindness in any way I can. I'm Olivia, a 28-year-old pastry chef. I love my job. It allows me to be creative and make people happy with my cakes and pastries. I live in a small but cozy house that I bought with my husband, Andres. We met 2 years ago, and it was love at first sight for both of us. Andres works as a software engineer. He's quiet and serious, but he has a good heart. We got married a year after we met, and life has been mostly good, except for one problem. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Chambers. From the day I met her, Eleanor made it clear she didn't like me. She's a tall, stern woman who always says what she thinks. She raised Andres by herself, and they are very close. She wanted Andres to marry her friend's daughter, Chloe, and she told me so the first time we met. Chloe is around our age, pretty, and she works as a lawyer. Eleanor often talks about how smart and talented Chloe is. One sunny Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen preparing a new cake recipe for my blog. Andres was in the living room working on his laptop. I heard the front door open and Eleanor's voice calling out, "Olivia, dear, are you home?" she said, her tone polite but cold. "Yes, Mrs. Chambers, I'm in the kitchen," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She walked in, looking around with a disapproving frown. "I see you're baking again. Don't you think you should find a real job?" I sighed quietly. "I love baking, Mrs. Chambers. It makes me happy." She sniffed. "Well, Chloe just got promoted at her law firm. She's doing so well." I forced a smile. "That's great for her." Eleanor walked over to the counter and picked up a cookie. "I still think Andres would have been better off with her." I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. Just then, Andres walked in. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprised but happy to see her. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by," she said, her tone softening as she turned to him. They chatted for a bit, and then Eleanor said she had to leave. After she left, I turned to Andres. "Doesn't it bother you the way she talks about me?" Andres looked uncomfortable. "She's just set in her ways, Olivia. She doesn't mean any harm," he uttered. "But she said again that she wishes you'd married Chloe," I said, feeling frustrated. Andres sighed. "I love you, Olivia. That's what matters. Just ignore her comments." I nodded, but it wasn't easy. I knew Eleanor would never stop trying to make me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son, but I loved Andres, and I was determined to make our marriage work, no matter what his mother said or did. Life went on after Eleanor's visit, but her words lingered in my mind. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Andres and me grew. I felt like I was walking on eggshells whenever the topic of his mother came up. Andres was my husband, and I loved him, but it hurt that he couldn't see how his mother's behavior was affecting our marriage. One evening, while we were having dinner, I decided to bring it up again. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't keep my feelings bottled up any longer. Andres, we need to talk about your mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. What about her? He asked. It's just that every time she visits, she makes such caustic comments, and it feels like she's trying to drive a wedge between us, I explained. Andres sighed, putting his fork down. Olivia, she's my mom. She's not trying to hurt anyone. She's just protective. Andres replied calmly. But don't you see? She's constantly comparing me to Chloe. She even told me she wishes you had married her instead, I said, my frustration growing. Andres frowned. She said that? Yes, she did, and it's not the first time, I replied, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Look, I know my mom can be difficult, but she raised me on her own. I can't just turn my back on her. I'm not asking you to turn your back on her. I just want you to understand how her words and actions are affecting me, affecting us, I said, my voice tinged with desperation. Andres reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, Olivia. I'll talk to her, okay? I'll make sure she understands that she needs to respect our marriage, he concluded. I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. But deep down, I wasn't sure if anything would change. Eleanor was set in her ways, and I had a feeling it would take more than a conversation to change her behavior. A few weeks later, Andres's birthday was approaching. I wanted to do something special for him, so I planned a small party with our friends and family. I knew inviting Eleanor was risky, but she was Andres's mother, and I didn't want to exclude her. The day of the party arrived, and I was busy in the kitchen preparing Andres's favorite dishes. The house was filled with the smell of baking and the sound of laughter as our guests arrived. Eleanor arrived just as I was taking the cake out of the oven. She walked into the kitchen and looked around, her lips pressed into a thin line. Olivia, what's all this? She asked, her tone disapproving. It's Andres's birthday. I wanted to do something special for him, I replied, trying to keep my voice friendly. She sniffed. Seems like a lot of unnecessary fuss. Chloe always says that simple celebrations are more meaningful. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Well, Andres likes it when I cook for him, and it's his day, so I want to make it special. Eleanor didn't say anything more, but I could tell she wasn't pleased. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and focus on the party. As the evening went on, everything seemed to be going well. Andres was having a good time, and our guests seemed to be enjoying themselves. I was starting to relax when I heard a commotion coming from the living room. I rushed in to find Eleanor standing in the middle of the room, her face red with anger. Andres was trying to calm her down, but he was having none of it. This is all wrong. This isn't how you celebrate a birthday, Eleanor exclaimed, her voice rising. Mom, please, it's my birthday and I'm enjoying myself. Can't you just be happy for me? Andres said, his tone pleading. Eleanor turned to me, her eyes blazing. You did this on purpose, didn't you? You wanted to make me look bad. You wanted to show that you know better than me. I was taken aback by her accusation. Mrs. Chambers, that's not true. I just wanted to make Andres's birthday special, I said. But Eleanor wasn't listening. She stormed out of the house, leaving everyone in shock. I looked at Andres, my heart sinking. This was supposed to be a happy occasion, but it had turned into a disaster, and I had a feeling that things were only going to get worse from here. The weeks following Andres's birthday were tense. Andres tried to talk to his mom, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced I had purposely tried to make her look bad. I felt like I was stuck in a bad dream, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wake up. Andres and I argued more. He kept saying I should try to understand his mom's point of view, but I felt like he wasn't trying to understand mine. I was hurt and frustrated, and I didn't know how to make things better. Then one day, Andres came home with an idea. Let's throw a family dinner, he said, sounding hopeful. Maybe if Mom sees that we're trying to include her, she'll start to come around. I was skeptical, but I agreed. I love Andres, and I wanted our marriage to work, so we planned a dinner and invited Eleanor. The day of the dinner arrived, and I was a nervous wreck. I cooked all day, making sure everything was perfect. Andres helped me set the table and decorate the dining room. We were both trying to make this work. Eleanor arrived, and I greeted her at the door. "Welcome, Mrs. Chambers. It's good to see you," I said, forcing a smile. She looked around, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Olivia. I appreciate the invitation," she said, and there was a hint of warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard before. The dinner started off well. We all sat down and I served the food. Eleanor even complimented my cooking, which surprised me. Then it was time for dessert. I had made my signature cake, one that I was particularly proud of. I knew Eleanor was allergic to peanuts, so I was very careful to avoid having them. As we all enjoyed the cake, I noticed Eleanor suddenly stop eating. Her face turned red and she started coughing. "Mom, are you okay?" Andres asked, jumping up from his chair. Eleanor gasped for air, her hand clutching her throat. "Peanuts!" she managed to choke out. Andres immediately got her allergy medicine and helped her take it. Slowly she started to breathe easier, but she was still red and looked scared. Once she caught her breath, she turned to me, her eyes filled with accusation. "You did this on purpose," she said, her voice shaky. I was shocked. "No, Mrs. Chambers, I would never do that. I was so careful." But Andres interrupted, his voice filled with anger. "Olivia, how could you? You know about Mom's allergy," he accused excitedly. "I didn't do it, Andres, I swear," I said, near tears. Eleanor looked at me, her expression triumphant. "You tried to get rid of me. You want me out of your life," she hissed. "No, that's not true," I protested, but it was like they couldn't hear me. The rest of dinner passed like a blur. Eleanor went to another room, saying she needed to lie down. Andres was furious about what had happened. He said he needed time to think and left the house. I sat at the table alone, staring at the uneaten cake. I didn't understand what had happened. I knew I hadn't put any peanuts in that cake, but if I didn't, then who did and why? I felt like the world was crumbling around me. My marriage was falling apart, and I was being accused of something I didn't do. I didn't know how to prove my innocence, and I didn't know if Andres would even believe me if I did. I felt helpless and scared, and I didn't know what to do. The dinner disaster lingered in the air like a bad aftertaste. Everyone had left. The room was eerily silent, but the tension was still palpable. I started clearing the table and taking the dishes into the kitchen. That's where I ran into Eleanor. My mother-in-law cornered me, her eyes glittering with anxious triumph. "Well, Olivia, I guess now everyone will see you for who you really are. Criminal," she sneered. I stared at her in disbelief. "Eleanor, this is insane. I didn't do anything to the cake." "Oh, but who will believe you now?" she said, her voice laced with venom. "However, there's a way out for you. Divorce Andres and sign the house over to him. Do that and I won't go to the police." My heart pounded in my chest. This was blackmail. "You can't be serious," I managed to say. "Oh, I am very serious," she said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. Before I could respond, Andres walked in. His face was hard, unreadable. "Is it true, Olivia? What my mother is saying?" he asked, his voice cold. I looked at him desperately, hoping he would see reason. "Andres, please, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything. Your mother is trying to frame me." But his expression didn't change. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but right now, I'm siding with my mother. I want a divorce, Olivia, and the house should be mine." I felt like the ground had been pulled from under my feet. This was not the man I married. This was not the Andres I loved. "No, Andres, you can't do this. We built this life together. Please see reason," I pleaded, but he didn't budge. "It's over, Olivia. I've made up my mind," Andres said. Eleanor watched the scene, a satisfied smirk on her face. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and called the police. If Eleanor wanted to play this game, then let's play it with all cards on the table. When the police arrived, Eleanor immediately started her performance, tears and all, claiming I tried to kill her with peanuts. I stood my ground. "That's not true. I didn't do anything to the cake. She's trying to frame me because she wants me out of her son's life," I said firmly. The officers looked between us, clearly trying to figure out who to believe. And then I took out my main trump card. I had installed cameras in the kitchen for my baking blog. Wait, I said. There might be footage. We can check the kitchen cameras. Everyone's eyes turned to me. Andres looked confused, but Eleanor's face drained of color. We all went to the kitchen, and I pulled up the footage on my laptop. The video showed the kitchen, the cake on the counter, and then there she was. Eleanor sneaking into the kitchen, looking around before pulling something out of her purse and sprinkling it over the cake. The room fell silent as the truth revealed itself on the screen. Eleanor tried to speak, to explain, but her words were empty. The evidence was right there. Andres looked from the screen to his mother, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. The police took Eleanor away, and Andres and I were left in the echoing silence of the house. He tried to apologize, to explain, but the damage was done. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. The day of the court hearing arrived like a storm, full of tension and uncertainty. The courtroom was intimidating with its high ceilings and the judge's stern gaze. My heart pounded as I took my seat, feeling like I was in some surreal movie. The proceedings began, and Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was the first to take the stand. Dressed in a somber outfit, she looked the part of a distressed victim. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, with trembling hands and a quavering voice. She portrayed herself as an innocent wronged by my alleged malicious actions. I can't believe she would do something like this to me, Eleanor whimpered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My fists clenched in my lap. It was infuriating to watch. She posed as a victim. Then without warning, Eleanor clutched her chest and collapsed, feigning a faint. The courtroom erupted into chaos. "Is there a doctor here?" someone shouted. I sat there frozen as people rushed to her aid. This was another one of her theatrics, but it was working. The judge called for a recess, and Eleanor was taken out of the courtroom, still playing the role of the frail, aggrieved mother. When the trial resumed, it was Andres's turn to testify. My heart ached as I looked at him. The man I once loved, now a stranger willing to believe the worst in me. "Your Honor, I can't express how shocked I was," Andres said, his voice steady but cold. "I trusted Olivia, and I never thought she could do something so heinous." His words cut through me like a knife. He was completely under his mother's spell, blinded by her manipulation. My lawyer presented my defense, highlighting Eleanor's history of hostility towards me and bringing forth the evidence of the kitchen video. The footage was clear, showing Eleanor surreptitiously adding peanuts to the cake. As the video played, there were murmurs in the courtroom. Eleanor's facade began to crumble, but she still clung to her act. "This is a setup. She's trying to frame me," Eleanor cried out, but her words sounded hollow now. The judge watched the video intently, his expression unreadable. When it finished, he called for a recess to deliberate. Sitting there waiting for the verdict felt like an eternity. My entire life hung in the balance, based on the decision of a man who had never met me before today. Finally, the judge returned. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. After reviewing the evidence presented, it is clear that the allegations against Mrs. Olivia Chambers are unfounded. The video footage shows Mrs. Eleanor Chambers adding the allergen to the cake herself. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Relief washed over me, followed by a surge of vindication. Eleanor let out a shriek, still clinging to her role as victim, but her screams went unheeded. "Therefore, I find Mrs. Olivia Chambers not guilty of the charges against her," the judge concluded. Tears filled my eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and triumph. The truth had prevailed despite Eleanor's theatrics and Andres's accusations. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I had faced my fears and stood up for myself. After the trial, life seemed to move in a blur. Winning the case brought relief, but it also left a gaping hole where my former life used to be. The house felt even emptier now. I missed Andres despite everything, but life had to go on. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in baking and my blog. My followers were a source of strength, sending messages of support and love. It felt good to be understood and appreciated. One day, while I was recording a new recipe, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Addison. "I have news," she wrote. "Let's meet up." I texted her back that I agreed and smiled, grateful for the distraction. Addison was a pillar of support for me in everything. When we met at our usual coffee shop, she grinned, her eyes shining. "I'm getting married," she exclaimed. I gasped, joy overflowing my heart. "Addison, that's amazing. Tell me everything." As she gushed about her fiancé and their plans, I felt genuinely happy for her. It was refreshing to talk about something other than my own troubles. Then, Addison's expression turned serious. "Olivia, how are you really doing?" she asked. I sighed, stirring my coffee. "I'm getting by. The house feels empty, but I'm managing." Addison reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're strong, Olivia, and you did the right thing, standing up for yourself." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "Yeah, I did. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." We chatted for a while longer before parting ways. As I walked back home, I felt a sense of determination. I had survived the storm. Now it was time to rebuild. Over the next few weeks, I poured my energy into my blog, creating new recipes and sharing them with my followers. The positive feedback was uplifting. It felt good to be doing something I loved, something that brought joy to others. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Eleanor's lawyer. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside was a formal apology from Eleanor. She expressed her remorse for her actions and the pain she had caused. I read the letter, but behind every word were hidden taunts, insults, and threats. I realized I couldn't forgive her, not now. The next day I received another piece of news. The divorce papers had been finalized. My marriage to Andres was officially over. It was a bittersweet moment. A chapter of my life had closed, but a new one was waiting to be written. I called Addison to share the news. "It's official. The divorce is finalized," I told her. Addison's voice was gentle. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Relieved, I guess. Sad too. It's complicated." "Take your time, Olivia. Healing isn't a race," Addison reassured me. That night I baked a cake, not for a video or a client, but for myself. As I mixed the batter and preheated the oven, I felt a sense of peace. Baking had always been my sanctuary, and it felt good to be in my element again. As the cake baked, the sweet aroma filled the house, bringing back memories. Some were painful, but others were filled with love and laughter. I realized then that those memories were a part of me, a part of my journey. When the cake was done, I sat at the kitchen table with a slice and a cup of tea. The first bite was delicious, a reminder of the simple joys in life. I smiled to myself, feeling a glimmer of hope. Sweet justice had been served, but it was the small, sweet moments like this that truly mattered. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew I was ready to face them. This was my new beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it. As our plane took off with a course for Bali, my heart was pounding with anticipation of the mystery. This wasn't just a honeymoon, it was a daring escape from Riley's clutches, a gamble that could either rescue my marriage or send it crashing down. I always imagined that married life would be an adventure, a journey shared with the love of my life, David. We met through a mutual friend, and captivated by his maturity and charm, I found myself falling deeply in love. After 3 years of a beautiful relationship, as I approached my 30s, we tied the knot, embarking on what I believed would be our happily ever after. Our jobs, demanding as they were, left little room for extended vacations, so our honeymoon, much anticipated, was repeatedly postponed. We dreamed of Bali, an island paradise in Indonesia known for its lush landscapes and serene beaches. Planning our honeymoon became our sweet escape, poring over brochures and websites, imagining ourselves amidst Bali's beauty. It was our little project, a beacon of hope amid our bustling lives. Yet amid this dream, a shadow loomed. My mother-in-law, Riley. At 63, Riley was a formidable presence. Divorced since David was young, she had raised him single-handedly, a fact David deeply respected. He felt indebted, providing her financial support since his first paycheck. This support seemed to have transformed into a leash, with Riley pulling the strings. Her overprotectiveness was suffocating. Every weekend she descended upon our home, taking charge of household chores not to aid me, but to tend to her son. "David likes his shirts folded this way," she'd say, rearranging our closet to her liking. I initially admired her dedication, but soon realized it was a ploy to maintain control over David's life and by extension mine. I tried to be understanding, attributing her behavior to maternal instinct, but as weekends turned into routine intrusions, my patience waned. Her presence became an unspoken tension, a silent battle for dominance in our home. My attempts at compromise were met with criticism and passive-aggressive remarks. "Delilah, this isn't how David likes his food," she chided, taking over the kitchen. Her words, laced with disdain, left me feeling inadequate, an outsider in my own home. David, caught between us, seemed oblivious to the growing storm. His loyalty to his mother was unshakable, his inability to confront her frustrating. I felt alone, wrestling with the realization that my dream of a happy marriage was slowly being overshadowed by the ever-present figure of my mother-in-law. It was in these moments of despair that I knew something had to change. I couldn't let Riley's overbearing nature ruin what David and I had built. Our honeymoon in Bali wasn't just a vacation. It was to be our reclaiming of happiness, a much-needed respite from the suffocating grip of Riley's love for her son. But as I would soon discover, our plans for a peaceful getaway were about to face their biggest hurdle yet. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of my situation grew increasingly apparent. Riley's influence over our household, and more distressingly, over David, seemed to tighten with each visit. Her weekends with us were marked by a barrage of criticisms, each word a subtle jab at my competence, each gesture a claim over David's affection. "Delilah, this isn't how David likes his coffee," she would comment, her voice dripping with a patronizing tone. It felt as if she was meticulously painting me as the incompetent wife, unworthy of her son's love. Her presence in our home, once an annoyance, had morphed into an oppressive force, casting a shadow over our marriage. David, for his part, seemed trapped in a state of denial, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the strain his mother's interference was causing. I remember the evening I finally mustered the courage to address the issue, my voice quivering with a mixture of fear and frustration. "David, we need to talk about your mother," I began, the words feeling like a betrayal even as they left my lips. He listened, his face a mask of resignation, as I poured out my grievances. Her constant criticism, her intrusions. "It's like she's still trying to parent you, and in doing so, she's suffocating us." To my surprise, David nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I'll speak to her," he promised, but the words rang hollow, the conviction in his voice lost in the shadow of his mother's influence. Our plans for Bali were a beacon of hope amidst the turmoil. The idea of walking along serene beaches, exploring lush landscapes, and immersing ourselves in a culture so vibrant and different from our own was a much-needed rest we both craved. But just as we began to indulge in this dream, reality struck a cruel blow. "I've been thinking, and I've decided to join you on your honeymoon," Riley announced casually one evening. The words hit me like a physical blow, their implications sending a wave of disbelief and anger coursing through me. Our honeymoon, our sacred escape, was now under threat. I looked at David, expecting outrage, a sign of protest, but all I saw was a confused man torn between loyalty to his mother and duty to his wife. The silence that followed was deafening, a testament to the power Riley wielded over us. That night, as David and I lay in bed, a plan began to take shape. "We can't let her do this, David. This is our time, our moment," I whispered, my voice steady with newfound resolve. David, usually so hesitant, nodded in agreement. It was clear if we were to salvage our honeymoon, and perhaps our marriage, we had to take a stand. The next morning, under the guise of daily life, David and I sat down at the table to discuss strategy. Our kitchen, usually a place of morning chatter and the aroma of coffee, had transformed into a war room. "We can't let her take this from us, David. Bali is about us, not her," I began, my determination unwavering. David, usually the peacemaker, surprised me. "I agree. We need to be clever about this." He had always been the gentle soul, avoiding conflict, but the thought of his mother intruding on our honeymoon seemed to ignite a rare fire in him. Our plan was simple yet bold. We would lead Riley to believe that our honeymoon was proceeding as initially planned, but in reality, we would change our itinerary, departing and returning earlier than we had told her. The deception felt necessary, a little rebellion against the suffocating hold she had on our lives. As the days passed, we moved into action, discussing our plans surreptitiously so Riley wouldn't overhear. We booked our flights and accommodations, carefully coordinating the dates to ensure our paths wouldn't cross with hers in Bali. The day we left for Bali, I felt a cocktail of emotions: excitement, guilt, but most of all, a sense of liberation. Riley waved us off with a smug smile, unaware of the ruse. As our plane took off, I leaned into David, whispering, "This is it. Our real journey begins now." Bali was everything we had dreamed of and more. The vibrant culture, the breathtaking landscapes, and the tranquil beaches were a balm to our weary souls. For the first time in months, I saw David relax, the lines of stress smoothing from his brow. We explored ancient temples, indulged in the local cuisine, and lost ourselves in the beauty of the island. Each day in Bali felt like a step towards reclaiming our marriage, our bond strengthening with every shared experience. But as our return date approached, the reality of facing Riley and the consequences of our deception loomed over us. We prepared ourselves for the storm that was sure to follow. Our return was met with a deafening silence. Riley, who was supposed to be enjoying her own time in Bali, was conspicuously absent. The house, usually echoing with her presence, felt strangely peaceful. It wasn't long before the storm hit. Riley returned, her fury uncontained. "How could you deceive me? You left me alone in Bali." Her voice was a mix of betrayal and indignation. It was hard to believe that this was the same woman who had smugly waved us off, thinking she had outmaneuvered us. David, standing beside me, finally found his voice. "Mom, you crossed a line. Our honeymoon was not about you." His words, firm and unwavering, marked a turning point in their relationship. Riley's face contorted with anger, but beneath it, I saw something else. Realization. The realization that her son was no longer the boy she could control, that her actions had consequences. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over our household. Riley's visits became less frequent, her criticisms less biting. It seemed our act of rebellion in Bali had shifted the dynamics of our relationship. For David and me, Bali was more than a honeymoon. It was a journey of rediscovery, a testament to the strength of our bond. We had faced our biggest challenge yet and emerged stronger, more united. As I reflect on our journey, I realize that sometimes it takes a bold stand to break free from the chains that bind us. Our story is one of love, not just for each other, but for the life we chose to build together, free from the shadows of the past. After our trip to Bali, our home felt different, like a weight had been lifted off of it. The air was lighter, the conversations more carefree. Riley's grip on our lives, once unyielding, had loosened, giving us the space we desperately needed. I watched as David transformed. The man who once shrank from confrontation now stood taller, his words carrying a new weight. His conversations with Riley were calm yet firm, a clear boundary being drawn. It was as if Bali had not just been a retreat, but a rite of passage for him, a journey from being her son to being my partner. Riley's visits became infrequent, her presence less imposing. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Where there was once criticism and control, there was now a hesitant but growing respect. It was as if our reunion in Bali had been a wake-up call, a reminder that her son's allegiance was now shared with another. For me, the change was profound. The home that had once felt like a battleground was now a sanctuary. I found joy in the little things, cooking a meal without fear of criticism, planning our weekends without the looming presence of Riley. Our marriage, once strained under the weight of her expectations, now thrived in the freedom we had carved out for ourselves. Our relationship with Riley, too, found a new equilibrium. There was a cautious peace, an unspoken agreement to coexist with respect for each other's boundaries. She was still David's mother, a fact I respected, but she was no longer the ruler of our household. As I look back, I realized that Bali was more than a destination. It was a turning point. It taught us the power of unity, the strength that comes from standing together against the odds. Our love, tested by the trials Riley unwittingly put us through, emerged stronger, more resilient. Life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most unexpected ways. Our journey with Riley was one such lesson, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what you believe in can lead to a better, more harmonious existence. David and I learned the importance of setting boundaries, of protecting the sanctity of our relationship. We discovered that true strength lies not in acquiescence, but in the courage to confront and resolve. Our marriage, once overshadowed by Riley's overbearing nature, now stood on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. We also saw a change in Riley. The realization that her son had grown into a man with his own life seemed to soften her. There was a new, albeit grudging, respect in her interactions with us. Perhaps in her own way, she too had journeyed through her own process of letting go. As David and I look towards the future, we do so with a renewed sense of hope. Our journey has not been easy, but it has been worthwhile. We've learned that together we can face any challenge, turn any tide. The situation we have been in is a testimony to the power of love, the power of unity. It's a story of emerging from the shadows, of finding light in the darkest of places. And as we move forward hand in hand, we do so with the knowledge that whatever lies beyond the horizon, we will face it together.